Leo had heard the warning 1,000 times, a mantra woven into the fabric of his childhood. It was the last thing his grandmother, Alara, would say to him as he ran out the door to play, the first question she'd ask when he returned with muddy shoes and scraped knees. "You didn't go near the woods, did you, Leo?" And he never had. The woods were a dark, brooding presence that bordered the back of her property, separated from her perfectly manicured lawn by a crumbling stone wall, no taller than his waist. To him, it was simply Blackwood Forest, a name that seemed less like a title and more like a description. Now, at 24, Leo was back in his grandmother's house. He wasn't a child anymore, but a man adrift, having lost his job in the city and retreating to the familiar quiet of his hometown to figure things out. Alara welcomed him with open arms and the same gentle, yet firm rules. The warning about the woods, however, felt different now. It was no longer a simple command to a child, but a plea steeped in a fear he couldn't comprehend. He'd see her sometimes, standing by the kitchen window, her gaze lost on the dense line of ancient oaks and pines. Her knuckles would be white as she gripped the windowsill, her eyes holding a storm of old sorrows. When she noticed him looking, she would just shake her head and turn away, the moment sealed off. "It's just an old forest, Gran," he had tried to reason with her one afternoon, watching the wind rustle the high canopy. "What are you so afraid of?" She had turned to him, her face unusually stern. "Some things are old for a reason, Leo. They hold memories we're meant to forget. That wall is there to protect us, not just to mark a boundary. Promise me you'll respect it." He had promised, of course, more to soothe her than out of any genuine belief in the danger. To him, it was a collection of trees, probably full of squirrels and the occasional deer. Nothing more. His days fell into a slow, monotonous rhythm. Job applications in the morning, helping Alara with her garden in the afternoon, and long, aimless hours in between. To combat the boredom, he had brought his drone. It was his one expensive toy, a sleek piece of technology that felt wonderfully out of place in the rustic, timeless setting of his grandmother's home. He loved flying it, high above the town, watching the world shrink into a map of rooftops and winding roads. One particularly still and humid afternoon, he was flying the drone near the edge of the property. On his phone's screen, he watched the world from a bird's-eye view, guiding the machine over his grandmother's rose bushes and past the tall scarecrow in the vegetable patch. He grew bolder, pushing it closer to the forest's edge, mesmerized by the stark contrast between the sun-drenched lawn and the deep, impenetrable shadows of Blackwood. He was so focused on the screen, on the intricate dance of light and shadow, that he didn't notice the sudden gust of wind that whipped through the valley. The drone stuttered in the air. The image on his phone tilted violently, and he heard the faint, high-pitched whine of the motors straining. He tried to correct its course, to pull it back, but it was too late. The drone clipped the branch of an overhanging oak and spiraled downwards, disappearing from view. He heard the sickening final crunch of plastic and electronics meeting the forest floor. Silence. His heart sank. It had gone down just inside the woods, no more than 20 or 30 feet past the old stone wall. He stared at the spot where it had vanished. He could almost see the glint of its white chassis against the dark, mossy ground. It was an expensive piece of equipment, and the thought of leaving it there to rust was unbearable. Alara was inside, taking her afternoon nap. She would never have to know. He could be in and out in 5 minutes. A quick hop over the wall, a few steps into the trees, and back before she even woke up. The warning echoed in his mind, his grandmother's fearful eyes flashing in his memory. But he was an adult now. What could possibly happen in 5 minutes, just a few feet from his own backyard? Shaking his head at the lingering childhood fear, he walked purposefully towards the crumbling stone wall, his gaze fixed on the shadows that had just swallowed his drone. With a deep breath, he placed his hands on the cool, moss-covered stones and vaulted over, landing softly on the damp earth of Blackwood Forest. The air immediately felt different. Cooler, heavier, and utterly, unnervingly still. The moment his feet touched the ground, the world changed. On his grandmother's side of the wall, the air hummed with the distant sounds of the neighborhood, a lawnmower, the laughter of children down the street, the gentle rustle of leaves in a civilized breeze. Here, inside Blackwood, there was only a profound and absolute silence. It wasn't just quiet. It was a void of sound, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. No birdsong, no chittering squirrels, not even the buzz of an insect. The thick canopy of leaves overhead seemed to swallow the sunlight, casting the forest floor in a perpetual twilight that felt hours later than the bright afternoon he had just left. Leo shook off the initial wave of unease, chiding himself. It was just a dense, old-growth forest. Of course, it was darker and quieter. He scanned the ground, his eyes adjusting to the dim light. The drone, with its bright white shell, should have been easy to spot against the dark mulch of fallen leaves and moss. He took a few steps forward, the crunch of his own footsteps sounding unnaturally loud in the oppressive stillness. "Hello?" he called out softly, his voice feeling small and intrusive. It was absorbed by the trees, without an echo. He walked in the direction he thought the drone had fallen, his eyes darting back and forth. The ground was surprisingly clear of underbrush, the forest floor a smooth carpet of dark soil and ancient, gnarled roots that snaked across his path like sleeping serpents. 10 minutes passed, then 15. The simple 5-minute retrieval mission was becoming a frustrating search. A prickle of anxiety started to crawl up his spine. It felt like the woods were playing a trick on him, hiding what he was looking for, subtly shifting the landscape when he wasn't looking. He was certain he was walking in circles, passing the same trio of strangely bent birch trees multiple times. He stopped to get his bearings, turning back towards where he thought the wall should be. He couldn't see it. The trees stood in a solid, unbroken line, their trunks melding into a wall of bark and shadow. A genuine sliver of panic wedged itself in his throat. He fought it down. He was a grown man, not a lost child from a fairy tale. He just needed to be logical. He took out his phone to check his GPS, but there was no signal. "Of course," he muttered, the sarcasm doing little to comfort him. It was then that he noticed it. A faint impression in the dirt, not quite a path, but a trail where the leaf litter had been subtly worn away over time. It was a whisper of a trail, one you would never see if you weren't looking for it. Believing the drone might have skidded along this clearer stretch of ground, he began to follow it, his steps more cautious now. The feeling of being watched was growing stronger, a palpable pressure on the back of his neck. The trail wound deeper into the woods, leading him away from where he believed home was. Just as he was about to give up and backtrack, his foot nudged something soft. He looked down. Lying half buried in the dark soil, nestled beside a thick root, was a single small shoe. It was made of worn brown leather, the kind a very young child might wear, with a tiny, tarnished buckle on the strap. It was impossibly old, yet the leather was still supple, as if it had been lost only recently. Leo stared at it, his blood running cold. This was no squirrel's nest or deer track. This was human. He crouched down, his fingers hesitating before picking it up. It was light, fitting perfectly in the palm of his hand. All the rational explanations his mind tried to conjure. A lost item from a hiker decades ago, a discarded piece of trash, crumbled in the face of the overwhelming sense of dread that washed over him. He thought of his grandmother's face, her eyes filled with that inexplicable sorrow. This shoe felt like an answer to a question he had never known how to ask. He completely forgot about the drone. His only instinct was to flee. Clutching the small shoe in his hand, he turned and scrambled back the way he came, no longer caring about the noise he was making. He crashed through the trees, branches whipping at his face, his heart hammering against his ribs. The silence of the forest now seemed accusatory, the unseen watcher at his back urging him on. After a frantic, disoriented sprint. He saw it. A sliver of bright daylight through the trees. He ran for it, his lungs burning, and practically threw himself over the low stone wall, tumbling onto the familiar sun-warmed grass of the lawn. He lay there for a moment, gasping for air, the small leather shoe still clenched tightly in his fist. He pushed himself up and looked back at the forest. From the safety of the yard, it was just the woods again, dark, but inanimate. Yet he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that it was not. He scrambled to his feet and ran towards the house, bursting through the back door, his mind reeling with what he had found. He slammed the kitchen door shut behind him, leaning against it as he fought to catch his breath. The house was quiet and smelled of cinnamon and old books, a stark contrast to the cold, vacant silence of Blackwood. His hands were shaking. He uncurled his fist and stared at the small, pathetic-looking shoe that lay in his palm. It looked even older, more tragic, in the warm light of the kitchen. "Leo?" He jumped. Alara was standing in the doorway to the living room, a half-finished quilt in her hands. Her afternoon nap was over. Her eyes, usually soft, widened as she took in his appearance, his sweat-soaked shirt, the fresh scratches on his cheek, and the wild, panicked look in his eyes. Her gaze then dropped to his hand. She saw the shoe. The color drained from her face. The quilt slipped from her fingers, pooling in a soft heap at her feet. She didn't gasp or cry out. A fragile, terrifying stillness came over her, as if she were a porcelain doll that might shatter at the slightest touch. She took a slow, deliberate step towards him, her eyes never leaving the shoe. "Where?" she whispered, her voice a dry, rasping sound he had never heard before. "Where did you find that?" "In the woods," he confessed, his own voice trembling. "I'm so sorry, Gran. My drone crashed, and I just went to get it. I didn't go far. I found this by a route." She didn't seem to hear his apology or his explanation. She reached out with a hand that shook violently and gently took the shoe from him. She sank into one of the kitchen chairs, her body moving as if her bones had suddenly turned to dust. She cradled the little shoe in both hands, her thumb stroking the worn leather with a tenderness that broke Leo's heart. The storm of old sorrows he had so often seen in her eyes was finally breaking. A single tear traced a path down her wrinkled cheek. Then, another. "I haven't seen this in 60 years, she said, her voice thick with unshed grief. This was Clara's. "Clara?" Leo asked softly, pulling up a chair opposite her. He had never heard that name before. Alara looked up from the shoe, her gaze seeming to pass right through him, into a memory 60 years deep. "My first child," she said. "Your aunt. She was born 2 years before your mother. A bright, fearless little girl with hair the color of honey. She was 3 years old. It was a summer day, much like this one. I was hanging laundry on the line, right out there." She gestured weakly towards the window. "She was playing on the lawn. I turned my back for no more than a minute. When I turned around, she was gone." The story tumbled out of her, a torrent of pain held back for decades. The frantic calling of Clara's name, the search parties combing through Blackwood, the entire town looking for days, then weeks. The police, the volunteers, the tracking dogs that lost the scent right at the stone wall. They found nothing. No clues, no sign of a struggle, no trace of the little girl in the yellow dress, and the small, brown shoes. She had simply vanished. "They said it was probably an animal," Alara continued, her voice hollow. "Or that she fell into a ravine and the rains covered her over. But I never believed it. It felt different. It felt like the woods took her. Like it swallowed her whole and left nothing behind." Leo finally understood. The warning wasn't about a monster or a ghost in the traditional sense. It was about this. The woods were haunted by a memory, by the specter of a lost child. His grandmother's fear was the raw, unending grief of a mother who never got an answer, who never even had a body to bury. The wall she was so adamant about wasn't to keep a physical danger out. It was to keep a crushing memory contained. "I'm so sorry, Gran," Leo said, his own eyes welling up. He reached across the table and placed his hand over hers. "I never knew." She gave him a watery, heartbroken smile. "How could you?" "We never spoke of her. It hurt too much. Your grandfather couldn't bear it. After a while, it was like she was a dream I'd had." She looked down at the tiny shoe in her hands. Until now. He forgot all about his broken drone. He sat with his grandmother at the kitchen table for the rest of the afternoon, listening as she spoke about Clara for the first time in his life. The weight of his discovery settled in him, a profound sadness for the aunt he never met, and the grandmother who had carried her loss in silence for a lifetime. The woods behind the house no longer seemed menacing, but tragic, a vast, silent monument to a little girl who had wandered in one sunny afternoon and never come home. The mystery of Blackwood Forest was solved, and the truth was infinitely more human and more terrible than any story he could have ever imagined.
Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. There's a lot more interesting content coming soon.